All right, diving into a fascinating figure today. Wass Albert.
Yeah, quite a challenge.
He's got this whole, like, celebrated Hungarian writer thing going on.
Right.
But there's some serious controversy swirling around his life, too.
Definitely a life full of twists and turns.
We're going to try to unpack all of it today.
Absolutely.
The good, the bad, and everything in between. So by the end of this, you have, like, a solid grasp on who this guy really was.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things is just how much his story, like, overlaps with major historical moments, you know? So he was born in 1908 into a Transylvanian noble family.
Whoa.
Like serious lineage.
Okay.
Roots going all the way back to the 12th century.
Yeah, you gave us some great sources on his family history. And, I mean, it's clear he came from a really specific, like, social and cultural environment.
Oh, definitely.
Do you think that, like, had an impact on his worldview early on?
Absolutely. And then on top of that, you've got the whole backdrop of post-World War I Transylvania.
Right.
Imagine being a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Watching your homeland go through all that upheaval as Romanian forces moved in.
Yeah.
There's even this amazing story about Wass Albert, like, participating in a protest when he was just 10 years old.
That's right. It was 1918 in Kolochvar.
A huge moment.
Yeah, I mean, that must have left a mark on him.
Oh, for sure. I mean, like, the seeds of his political awareness were definitely planted early on.
It's like he couldn't escape history.
Right. It just kept pulling him back in.
Yeah, and you can see that in his writings.
Yeah.
He's growing up surrounded by all this history and political turmoil, but then he also has this incredible thirst for knowledge.
Yeah.
I mean, he studied in Debrecen,
Right.
Hohenheim in Germany, even Paris.
He wasn't content with just one place or one perspective.
What do you think was driving that intellectual curiosity?
It seems like his interests just spanned so many disciplines and borders.
And that's where you really start to see the writer emerge, right?
Yeah, you start to see it in his early poetry, in the plays he had produced.
But then in 1935, his first novel,
Farkas Verum.
Wolf's Den,
Right.
it wins the prestigious Baumgarten Prize.
Huge turning point.
That's a big deal, right?
Absolutely not just any award.
It put him on the map as a serious literary figure.
Exactly. Recognition from the top literary minds of the time.
So what was it about Farkas Verum that made it stand out?
Well,
I know our sources mention themes of identity and belonging.
Yeah, and those were so relevant in Europe at the time.
Right. Europe's going through all these massive changes in the 1930s.
Exactly. Growing nationalism, all these questions about national identity.
Lots of anxiety about the future.
Exactly. And Wass Albert tapped right into all of that, exploring those themes through his characters in Farkas Verum.
He was writing about these really pressing issues.
Yeah, and that's probably why the novel resonated with so many people.
Critics and readers alike.
Right.
But right as his career is taking off,
Yeah.
life throws him a curveball, family obligations.
World War II looming on the horizon.
In 1935, he marries his niece, Eva Siemers.
Unique situation for sure.
Yeah, it definitely raised some eyebrows.
It was about preserving the family estate, though.
It speaks to the complexities of the time, I guess.
Yeah, extraordinary circumstances often lead to unconventional decisions.
But even with all that, his career still flourished.
He was super talented, there's no doubt about that.
He becomes a member of the Kisfaludy Tarsasag and the Magyar Kőali Akadémia.
Really esteemed Hungarian literary societies.
These were like the top literary minds in Hungary.
It really shows how much respect he had within those circles.
But then the 1940s hit, and with them come these serious allegations.
Accusations of war crimes.
Including the execution of 2 Romanian men and 2 Jewish Hungarian girls.
Heavy stuff.
Incredibly serious charges.
And they had a huge impact on his life, even though...
They were ultimately dismissed.
Right.
The sources are clear on that. The accusations were unsubstantiated.
But in 1951, he decides to immigrate.
First to Germany.
Right.
Then Hamburg, and finally the United States.
Big move.
So the question is why?
If he was clear of those charges, why leave everything behind?
What prompted that decision?
That's what we'll dig into next, the factors behind his emigration, the new life he built, and how it all continued to shake his writing.
Okay, sounds good. So he ends up leaving Hungary.
Yeah, early 1950s.
And it sounds like even though those accusations were baseless, the weight of them, you know...
It's hard to shake that kind of thing off, right?
Plus, post-war Europe was a crazy time.
Absolutely, everything was in flux.
I can see why for someone like Wass Albert,
Right.
starting fresh might have seemed like the only way forward.
Especially after all the scrutiny he'd already faced.
So he lands in the U.S.
Totally different world.
He ends up divorcing his first wife and later marries Elizabeth McLean.
An American woman.
It's like he was trying to build a whole new life, a new identity even.
Yeah, incredible transformation, right?
He goes from this celebrated writer in Hungary...
Member of all those prestigious literary societies.
...to a language professor at the University of Florida.
Talk about resilience.
Adapting to a completely different life.
It's pretty remarkable.
But the past doesn't just disappear, does it?
No, it doesn't.
The Romanian government actually tried to extradite him.
Oh, wow.
That must have been terrifying.
Bringing back all those old anxieties.
And those attempts failed.
Adds another layer to the story, right?
Questions about international law, different interpretations of history.
The whole idea of justice across borders.
Yeah, it shows how history just keeps influencing the present.
Absolutely. It shapes political decisions, international relations, all of it.
But through all of this, the emigration, the new marriage, the extradition attempts,
He keeps writing.
he never stopped.
And just writing from this period is really interesting.
Yeah, I noticed some recurring themes in the sources you provided.
Like what? Yeah.
Displacement, longing for home, that search for belonging.
All those themes mirror his own experience.
It's like he's processing his own upheaval through his writing.
Using it to explore the emotional and psychological toll of leaving everything behind.
A Fontanelli Bozorkani, the witch of Fontanelle.
Yeah.
A Jatopvisa Hegyemit, to give back my mountains.
Great examples.
You think those novels are directly connected to his struggles with identity and belonging?
I think it's definitely a valid interpretation.
They both grapple with the idea of home.
The loss of it, the difficulty of finding your place in a new world.
Yeah, and given what Wass Albert was going through at the time,
Right.
it's hard not to see those themes as deeply personal.
Absolutely.
Like maybe writing was his way of coping with the trauma of displacement.
That feeling of being caught between two worlds.
His novels got a lot of praise.
Beautiful language, powerful storytelling.
But they also drew criticism, right?
Yeah.
Especially later on.
Some critics saw his work as overly nationalistic.
Or romanticizing the past.
There were concerns about some of his views on ethnicity and national identity.
Which, looking back now,
Could be problematic.
it's a tough balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah.
Appreciating the artistry and the historical context,
Mm-hmm.
but also recognizing that some of the views expressed just don't align with our values today.
That's where critical engagement comes in.
Right.
We don't dismiss the whole body of work.
Just because some parts might feel outdated or insensitive,
It's about understanding the work within its historical context.
recognizing the complexities.
Having an open and honest conversation about the parts that challenge us.
How do we reconcile these seemingly contradictory parts of his legacy?
That's the big question, isn't it?
On the one hand, you have this talented writer,
Someone who clearly loved his homeland
tried to preserve its stories and traditions.
through his work.
But then on the other hand, there are these views that, from a modern perspective, can be really troubling.
I think it starts with recognizing that people are complex.
They are.
Their lives and perspectives are shaped by so many factors.
Upbringing experiences the time period they lived in.
It's all connected.
So it's not about condoning or condemning.
It's about understanding,
Seeing Wass Albert as a product of his time.
acknowledging both the good and the bad.
And maybe by doing that, we can better understand his work and its place in literary history.
Exactly. It's about looking beyond the surface
Engaging with the work on multiple levels.
and having those tough conversations about the parts that make us uncomfortable.
I think that's what Wass Albert's story ultimately asks us to do.
That critically challenge our assumptions, embrace the complexity of human experience.
It's a lot to think about. Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the life and works of Wass Albert.
Yeah, a really fascinating figure.
Someone whose story, I think, is as captivating as it is complex.
Right.
Deeply connected to his Transylvanian roots.
Mm-hmm.
Celebrated writer.
But also
someone who faced those serious accusations.
ultimately chose a life of exile.
And as we've been talking about, understanding his legacy really requires that nuanced perspective.
Absolutely.
Appreciating his talent.
The beauty of his language, the power of his storytelling,
While also acknowledging that historical context.
and how some of his views might clash with modern sensibilities.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
Yeah, it is.
So for our listener, who brought all these incredible sources to the table,
Clearly fascinated by Wass Albert.
what would you say is like the key takeaway here?
I think the most important thing is to experience his work firsthand.
You mean actually read his novels, his poems, his essays?
Yeah, don't just passively consume them.
Right.
Engage with them like you're having a conversation across time.
I like that.
Pay attention to those recurring themes, the echoes of history, the way he wrestles with questions of identity and belonging to the human condition.
So read with your heart and your head.
Exactly. Appreciate the artistry, but also think critically about the ideas he's presenting.
And how they might have been shaped by the world he lived in.
Exactly.
Because through that process,
I think you'll gain a really unique perspective on a specific time and place.
a perspective shaped by a life full of both triumph and tragedy.
Right.
It reminds us that literature can be this powerful lens for understanding history.
It's not just about the facts and dates,
It's about personal experience, artistic expression.
especially in the case of Wass Albert.
Yeah.
His life was so intertwined with the complexities of 20th century Europe.
I think his writing gives us a chance to really grapple with some tough questions.
About identity, about belonging, about the lasting impact of history.
And maybe the biggest takeaway is that there are no easy answers.
No simple interpretations.
Engaging with Wass Albert's legacy means embracing the gray area.
The contradictions.
Seeing him as a product of his time with all its complexities.
And by doing that,
maybe we gain a deeper appreciation for his work.
But also a more nuanced understanding of history itself.
Because history isn't just a collection of facts and dates.
It's a tapestry woven from countless individual stories.
Each with its own triumphs and tragedies.
Right.
Well, that's a great note to end on.
Yeah.
To our listener, as you keep exploring the world of Wass Albert, remember that the most rewarding journeys are often the ones that challenge us.
Make us question our assumptions.
Help us see the world through a different lens.
And who knows?
Maybe through this exploration you'll discover something new.
Not just about this controversial figure.
About yourself.
And the world we live in.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey.